Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And it's good to see you all here today. Well, it's a gorgeous sunny day here in St. Louis. We're not afflicted by some of the severe weather that is affecting other parts of the country. So the last few weeks we've been studying the Lotus Sutra. And I'd like to continue that today. Except before we get started, I'd like to return to a question that came up during last week's discussion. And I'm sort of reframing it a little bit, but it's along the lines of what do you do when someone in your presence says something that is hateful or bigoted or just plain wrong? What do you do when righteous anger arises? Well, do you just stay silent? Do you resort to questioning? Why do you say this? Why do you believe this? And continue as a journalist might, trying to understand the person they're interviewing. Or do you calmly state that you disagree and give reasons for that? But what do you do with that righteous anger that may arise? Well, it probably depends on the situation, what you do exactly. And it also depends on one's temperament, how we all handle things a little differently, which is good. But the Buddha's teaching, the early Buddhist teaching about righteous anger is fairly stern and clear. And he refers to it several times within the suttas, within the Pali Canon. He uses the simile of the saw, and many of you have heard this before. He says, even if low-down bandits were to sever you limb from limb with a two-handed saw, anyone who had a malevolent thought on that account would not be following my instructions. If that happens, you should train like this. Our minds will remain unaffected. We will blurt out no bad words. We will remain full of compassion with a heart of love and no secret hate. We will meditate, spreading a heart of love to that person. And with them as a basis, we will meditate, spreading a heart full of love to everyone in the world, abundant, expansive, limitless, free of enmity and ill will. That's how you should train. He says in another sutta, even if low-down bandits were to sever you limb from limb, anyone who has a thought of hate on that account would not be following my instructions. So that's the advice in the early Buddhist teachings. I think the Lotus Sutra points in the same direction, but is more nuanced. And perhaps it's because time had passed since the time of the Buddha, and the Buddha was And the teachers were including not mostly monastics, but large numbers of lay people. And I think it's fair to say that lay life includes a much larger array of situations of moral ambiguity. You have to deal with more in some ways. So in the section from this Sutra of Innumerable Meanings that we looked at previously, it says something along these lines, that this sutra leads a not yet awakened bodhisattva to aspire to awaken. It leads one with murderous heart to aspire to great compassion. It leads one who is angry to aspire to patience. So there may be the thought of anger, righteous anger. There may be that feeling, that emotion. But that then is viewed as a starting place, according to this teaching, and not someplace you want to end up. And just noticing it is the first step. Noticing it is the first step. And for many people, especially those who have not cultivated self-awareness, they may not even be able to make that step. So when you do make that step, that's a positive, not a negative. But it's not the ending destination, it's the starting place. And the Lotus Sutra, these teachings, point us in the direction of compassion. How do we achieve that? Well, there are skillful means, and that's what much of the Lotus Sutra is about. So we've talked in the last, I think, 3 sessions about the Sutra of Innumerable or Immeasurable Meanings, which is sort of a prelude to the Lotus Sutra proper. And we'll start with that today. There's a chapter that's entitled Introduction or Introductory. And interestingly enough, it starts off pretty much the same way as the beginning of the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings, with this congregation on this immense congregation on Vulture's Peak with all these different creatures, human and non-human, this vast assembly. And it starts off with the Buddha teaching the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings. But then the Buddha goes into a samadhi of immeasurable meaning. And as the Buddha is in that state, a beam of light originates from the tuft of hair between his eyebrows and illuminates 18,000 worlds, revealing all of the beings in those 18,000 worlds and who occupy the 6 realms, the human realm, the realm of heavenly beings, heavenly devas, the realm of animals, the realm of asuras or warriors, the realm of hungry ghosts, and the hell realm. So that all the people in the Buddha's congregation at that time could see all of these beings living out their lives in these various realms, and they were obviously awestruck. And one of the individuals in the audience was Maitraya. Maitraya is known and would have been known to anyone reading this sutra in the past as the future Buddha, who presumably has not yet appeared. Shakyamuni Buddha was a Buddha, but Maitreya is the next Buddha who has not yet appeared, apparently. And Maitreya is wondering, what is the meaning? He asks the question, what is the meaning of this beam of light that originates from Shakyamuni Buddha and illuminates these 18,000 worlds? What is the meaning of this sign? In order to get an answer, he goes to Manjushri. Manjushri is the bodhisattva that is associated with wisdom. So he's a repository of knowledge and wise counsel. That's the way Manjushri is represented. He's often shown with a sword for cutting through delusions. So then Maitreya Bodhisattva, wanting to resolve his own doubts and seeing what was on the minds of the 4 groups of the assembly, the monks, the nuns, the laymen and laywomen, as well as the gods, dragons, demon gods, and others, ask Manjushri, what is the reason for this auspicious and spiritual sign emitting such a great bright beam of light, illuminating the 18,000 eastern lands, revealing in detail the splendor of those Buddha worlds? Also revealing, the good, the bad, and the ugly in all those Buddha worlds. What's the meaning of this? Well, clearly we're in the realm of storytelling. And as we go through the Lotus Sutra, we pretty much remain within the realm of storytelling. So the one object of study is to just try to understand, well, what is this story trying to tell us? What is the teaching underlying the story? So Maitreya asked Manjushri, what's the meaning of this sign? Well, Manjushri says, well, I think from my experience, and Maitreya or Manjushri remembers his previous lives, and there are countless numbers of them. From his experience, this means that the Buddha is about to teach the great Dharma. He's about to teach the great Dharma. And in order to explain why Manjushri believes this, he goes back to a telling of a prior Buddha. And this prior Buddha is called the Buddha of Sun and Moonlight. And this prior Buddha was had a large following. For those who sought to be Shravakas, he taught the Dharma of the four truths of overcoming birth, old age, disease, and death. And for um, attaining nirvana. For those who sought to be Pratyeka Buddhas, those are sort of solitary Buddhas, he taught the Dharma of the 12 causes and conditions. And for the Bodhisattvas, he taught the 6 transcendental practices to lead them to attain supreme awakening and all-inclusive wisdom. The 6 transcendental practices are the same as the 6 paramitas that you may have heard of. These are virtues to be cultivated by bodhisattvas: compassion, loving kindness, morality, sympathetic joy, taking joy in the good fortune of others, and energy of practice, devoting energy to practice, and equanimity, those 6. So Manjushri, in a prior life, witnessed this Buddha of Sun and Moonlight to display this same sign with the light emanating from the tuft of hair between the eyebrows, illuminating all these different countless worlds with all these beings. And that was, and what followed was the teaching of the Lotus Sutra. The Sutra of the lotus flower of the great Dharma, the Lotus Sutra. So Manjushri thinks that the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha now, is about to do the same thing. Well, in the audience of, going back again to when this was taught by the Sun and Moonlight Buddha, there was a listener called Wonderful Light. And Wonderful Light took to this Lotus Sutra teaching and spread it widely among the followers at the time. He had many followers, and he taught this sutra for eons, it says. But among his followers, there was one disciple named, surprisingly, Fame Seeker. Wonderful Light, Dharma teacher, at that time had a disciple who was always lazy, greedily craving fame and gain, always seeking fame and gain. He often revisited homes of wealthy families, casting aside what he had learned, what he had repeated and memorized, forgetting everything and gaining nothing from it. Because of these things, he was called Fame Seeker. Yet by doing good works, he too was able to see the innumerable Buddhas. He made offerings to Buddhas, followed them in walking the great way and carrying out the 6 transcendental practices, and now he has seen the light of the Shakyas. Later, he will become a Buddha whose name will be Maitraya. He will save living beings everywhere. So Manjushri is telling Maitreya, that this was his past, that he was the bad student of wonderful light Buddha, and that he, through many lifetimes, because good seeds had been planted, presumably with the Lotus Sutra, Maitreya is now in line to be the next Buddha. And furthermore, Manjushri claims that he was wonderful light. He was wonderful light Buddha, the Dharma teacher. That was he himself. So these two are having a dialogue at the time of this story. The introductory chapter concludes with, the present Buddha emits a beam of light to help reveal the principle of the true character of things, to allow people to see things. The time has come for people to understand, with your palms together, wait single-mindedly. The Buddha will pour the rain of the Dharma to satisfy those who seek the way. The Buddha will pour the rain of the Dharma to satisfy those who seek the way. So this chapter represents a somewhat convoluted story, and I left out some of the further convolutions, but one point of it seems to be that even the worst student in the room, even the worst student in the room is destined for Buddhahood. And one message of the Lotus Sutra is for us to regard all beings, even the irritating ones, as being potential Buddhas, as being inchoate Buddhas, as being on the road to Buddhahood. Another function of this story of Maitreya and Manjushri is to point out that the teachings, the wisdom of Shakyamuni Buddha did not arise with Shakyamuni Buddha. However, instead, they are very old, perhaps as old as human consciousness, expressed in various ways, using skillful means, as the Buddha did. And in some measures, there are many, many Buddhas. There are Buddhas everywhere. And all of us, no matter how stumbling, are on the path to Buddhahood. So the Buddha, in illuminating these worlds, it is said, cast a golden light. Well, how do we cast a golden light over the worlds that we encounter? The pleasing and the ugly. How do we exercise skillful means? And how do we regard living beings? This is a question that arises repeatedly in Mahayana literature and be answered in various ways at various times. And all the different answers, I think, are complementary, not contradictory. So as we break up into groups for discussion, how do we cast this golden light? How do we exercise skillful means? And how do we regard living beings? Thank you very much for listening this morning, and we'll break up into groups.